Well, it's so good to see you this morning. Let's all stand together as we sing, He Lives. I serve a risen Savior, He's in the world today. I know that He is living, whatever men may say. I see His hand of mercy, I hear His voice of cheer, and just the time I need Him, He's always near. He lives, Christ Jesus lives today. He walks with me and talks with me along life's narrow way. He lives, salvation to be born.
searching for Jesus, looking to find hope for tomorrow and some peace of mind. Well, you can find him in the Bible and many churches that I know, but till you find him in the mirror, you've got a long way to go. So mirror, mirror on the wall, I know who is Lord of all. Just let me see him every day, for me, that is the only way. You heard of the truth, heard of his message. Shouldn't that turn you around? Could you have missed it, not understood it? Do you know what you have found? You're searching for Jesus, looking to find hope for tomorrow and some peace of mind. Well, you can find him in the Bible and many churches that I know, but till you find him in the mirror, you've got a long way to go. So mirror, mirror on the wall, I know who is Lord of all. Just let me see him every day, for
Thank you for that, choir. That was great. That was great. Well, we are not in 1 Peter chapter 5 today, but our topic will be out of 2 Kings chapter 6. 2 Kings chapter 6. I had us read from that passage because it really gets to the heart of what we're going to be talking about today. We've been looking at plot twists and different plot twists that are in the Bible. And I love series that are like this because they kind of move us around and remind us of stories that we were told about in Sunday school, right? But not always stories that we preach on every week. And so it's an exciting study for me personally. But as we look at these plot twists, we have been looking at this thought. And just last week we talked about eye-opening. And we talked about 2 Kings chapter 6, and we were looking at Elisha and what God was doing in his life. And what we saw there was how Elisha, actually, when he was surrounded by his enemy, he prayed for his servant. His servant was afraid, and his servant came to him, "What are we going to do?" And Elisha, instead of calling down fire from heaven, instead of calling for some other people's help, or instead of worrying about himself, he prayed a very simple prayer. He said, "Lord, open his eyes." And the Lord opened the servant's eyes so that he could see the chariots of fire, horses, angels surrounding him and Elisha. The spiritual warfare that is taking place around you is great, but you are surrounded by the angels of God. Amen. You are surrounded by God's provisions and protection. But as we move in today, the narrative continued. We finished there, and we finished the story dealing with Elisha specifically, but we have now looked at a different part of this passage, what we're going to dive into. Now, before I get into that, I want to share with you this whole passage has had this idea of war. And we've been talking about, like I said, we talked about the wars that were taking place and the attacks that were there, and they were surrounded, but they were also in a place where there was that spiritual warfare. Now, General Sun Tzu, author of a strategic general who is known for his tactical stance, known for his authoring of The Art of War. He made some pretty powerful statements, some that mimic some of the tactics that we see from our enemy. Now, of course, we could take some of these and use them for ourselves and make some spiritual connections to these and say, you know what, if we would just kind of live like this, we could find some victories. But as I read some of these things, I sit there and I go, man, I feel like he had the devil whispering in his ear as he was writing these things down, because it is eerie how close it is to some of the things that the devil does to us. One of the statements that he made was, even the finest sword plunged into salt water will eventually rust. You know, your enemy, the devil, he understands that when you are walking with the Lord, you are strong. But he also understands that even the finest sword, if he can bury it in salt water, he can get it to rust. You know, he understands that if he can bury you in the weight and the struggles of this world, he can get your faith to rust. If he can keep on burying you in that salt water of this world, he can get you to take your eyes off of the one who restores your faith each and every day. And there are some people here today that have been sitting in salt water, haven't we? Let's be honest. We've been sitting in salt water, and we can feel the rust taking over. It's been a long year. It's been a lot of struggles. People are going through pain. Our community, the news feeds that we're getting, it's difficult. And if we sit in salt water, we will rust. I will preach right there the rest of this day if we don't move on. Another thing he said, build your opponents a golden bridge to retreat across. Build your opponents a golden bridge to retreat across. Did you know that the devil is not so much concerned with you quitting on life as long as you'll quit on Jesus? He doesn't mind if you go out and give water to the poor. He doesn't mind if you go out and feed the hungry. He doesn't mind if you go out and you build orphanages in third world countries. He's all for that. Let's do that. Let's just not do it in the name of Jesus. He's fine with you standing up and taking political views and sharing your opinions and all those different things, as long as you're not doing it in the name of Jesus. See, he'll let you retreat. He's not going to sit there and, listen, he doesn't have to have total victory. He just needs to get you to run and hide. Another thing that he said, appear weak when you are strong and strong when you are weak. The devil would like for you to think that you're strong enough to fight him on your own, so that you choose to not fight him in the strength of the Lord. And then when you choose that, when you make that choice, he'll pounce. He'll pounce with no hesitation and no mercy. He said another thing, to fight and conquer in all your battles is not supreme excellence. To fight and conquer in all of your battles, that is not supreme excellence. Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. The devil has gotten so many people whipped into believing that they can't win, that they're too weak, that they're not strong enough. People are whipped into thinking that I've got no one else standing with me, whipped into thinking these depressing thoughts, and they are so bogged down by them that they no longer even stand. It's no longer even a fight. The devil would love that. Another thing, he said, when strong, avoid them. If of high morale, depress them. Seem humble to fill them with conceit. If at ease, exhaust them. If united, separate them. Attack their weaknesses, emerge to their surprise. And each of these have characteristics that the devil and his methods have been attached to. But there's one statement of particular interest to me, and it may be one of the more popular ones that he's made. Maybe you've heard this before. But he said, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the results of 100 battles. If you know yourself, but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. Now, I hope and pray that you know yourself, and we don't have enough time to dive into all of that, but I hope and pray that you know yourself. You know your weaknesses, you know your strengths. You know where the devil likes to attack you personally. You know the things that will get you every time. I hope you know those things. I hope you know, and I hope you've set up boundaries around those areas. But I think many of us struggle to know our enemy. We struggle to know the enemy. To understand and to know the enemy is to identify his strengths and weaknesses, to know his personality and capabilities, to know his desires and his habits. And if you really want to experience victory over him, you need to know his tactics in battle. You need to be able to call their next move. You need to be able to see what they are doing in the moment and then see through it and know how to respond. See, some things that we know about our enemy, specifically Satan or Lucifer. A few things we know about him. We know he's vicious. The Bible describes him as a roaring lion, as we read, a murderer from the beginning. He is powerful. Not even Michael the archangel stood against him in his own power, but called on the power of the Lord. He's vicious, he's powerful, he's deceptive. He's the father of lies, an angel of light. He's crafty. He is influential, the prince in the power of the air. He employs demons to further his reach. He is organized. His kingdom has princes. His kingdom has reach and has the things that we would look for because he's a ruler of the world. The list goes on and on. But rather than to dive into all those, I think these summarize and point to something very specific. All of these, as we look at these, they build, if all of these are true, then one thing I can guarantee you about our enemy is that he is strategic. He is strategic. He has taken aim at you, at your family, in a very specific way because he knows you. And we need to take heed. The devil doesn't haphazardly go about his business. In everything he does, he wants to undermine and attack God, God's plans, and God's people. As I said, we were talking about Elisha last week. And in 2 Kings chapter 6, where we left off was Elisha dealing with these soldiers that he had prayed, and he asked God, blind them, take away their sight. God takes away their sight, and then he goes down there and he leads them. He says, I'll take you where you need to go, and he leads them into the capital city, Samaria, and they are now blinded, surrounded by the Israelites when God opens their eyes and they see what is happening. They see they're in trouble. And the king, Jehoram, runs up to him and he says, should we kill him? Should we kill him? He's ready, right? And Elisha says, no, don't kill him. Feed him. Give him water and send him home. And that's where we look in verse number 23. It says, and he prepared a great provision for them. And when they had eaten and drunk, he sent them away, and they went to their master. So the bands of Syria came no more into the land of Israel. Good news. Israel had peace. They had peace with this enemy nation. But the devil doesn't like peace. And so over some time, we don't know how long the time was, but some stretch of time, Syria forgot the kindness that Israel had bestowed upon them. And it tells us in verse 24, and it came to pass after this, that Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, gathered all his host and went up and besieged Samaria. He went and surrounded them, and he was ready to fight against them. But not only are they dealing with this battle, but now they're also, in verse 25, the verse part of it, it says, and there was a great famine in Samaria, and behold, they besieged it. So now not only are they surrounded, but they are starving. They are starving in their own city. They are starving within the walls of their own kingdom. And there is nothing that they can do. Now, I don't know the extent of Satan's power over the minds of kings and the natural disasters in the earth, but I do know that Satan and his demons will take full advantage of every circumstance that they can to beat you down, to discourage you and defeat you. There was a very real battle happening with the Syrian army. There was a very real famine happening with the kingdom. But as we said last week, with every physical battle, there is a spiritual battle attached to it. And last week, as we discussed this, I challenged you that our takeaway was to live with eyes wide open to the work of God, right? Live with eyes wide open to the work of God. Whatever God's doing, have your eyes open to that work. But today I want to challenge you with this thought. Live with eyes wide open to the ways of the enemy. Live with eyes wide open to the ways of the enemy. See, the people were starving. Things were so bad that they were eating things that were unclean, donkeys and donkey heads, and they were expensive. People were going out to purchase this, but not only that, they were actually purchasing bird poop, I guess for seasoning. I don't know. They're starving. What? I know people are looking around like, I'm going to have to look that up in a commentary. I think he got that one wrong. Listen. Things were bad. And as we see this, we see in verse 26, the king, it says, and as the king of Israel was passing by upon a wall, there cried a woman unto him, saying, help, my lord, O king. And this was his response to this woman in his kingdom. He said, if the Lord do not help thee, whence shall I help thee? Out of the barn floor or out of the winepress? It wasn't him offering her food. It was him saying, how in the world, if God's not for you, how am I going to do anything for you, lady? Leave me alone. We're all starving here. What am I supposed to do for you? And we start to see this first way of the enemy. The first thing that the enemy would like for you to believe, here it is, that hope is nowhere to be found, not even in God. Hope is nowhere to be found, not even in God. God is not here to help you. That is what your enemy wants you to think. You are in a hopeless situation. See, he didn't point his finger to God as her hope. He pointed his finger at God for blame. Lady, don't look at me, look at him. You got a problem? It's not with me, it's him. See, he was pointing at God in anger. She didn't have much hope either. Matter of fact, if you read the story there, what you find is that the families were starving so much that this lady and her neighbor conspired with each other to do something very, very evil, very wicked. They decided to kill their babies. They both had young babies, and they decided, today, you will kill your baby and feed us with your child. And tomorrow, I will kill my baby and feed you with our child. And this lady's complaint, can you imagine the hopelessness that they're experiencing here, what they're going through? Come on. And this lady's complaint was that the woman, that she killed her child and fed this woman. And now today, this woman has taken and hidden her child. The complaint wasn't, I regret what I did. I'm sorry for what I've done. The complaint wasn't, she tricked me into killing my child. The complaint was, she won't kill her kid. The moral decay that has taken place here. But can you imagine the hopelessness that the people were feeling? And it was only a reflection of the hopelessness of the king. See, the devil wants you to live as if you have no hope. He wants you to drown in frailty and weaknesses. He wants to exaggerate your situation as if it is spinning out of all control. But you have to see through it. As you can imagine, the king was appalled by what was going on. And in verse 30, we see, it says, "And it came to pass when the king heard the words of the woman that he rent his clothes and he passed by upon the wall. And the people looked, and behold, he had sackcloth within upon his flesh." The second thing I want you to see about the enemy is that the enemy wants you to hide your pain and anxiety from those around you. The enemy wants you to hide everything going on. You see, this king, he had on sackcloth, which was usually a thing of humility. That was usually something of people that were crying out and showing their sorrow, showing their pain, showing what's happening in their lives. They'd put this on. It was almost a thing of, this is how we're going to beg God to help us. He had that on as he was walking around the city, but when he, maybe in the palace, he would wear that. But when he walked out in public, what did he do? He put on royal garbs. He put it all on and covered himself so that nobody saw that. And so often that reminds me of how we are. See, the king who should have been publicly leading an example of repentance and leading an example of crying out to God in humility, the king was covering up what was going on inside. And so often we cover up the things that are happening in our lives. We cover up the sorrow. We cover up the pain. We hide and we block people out so they don't see it. I'm going to handle this. I'm going to face this on my own. I don't want people around me seeing this. Last year, I preached a message called the mask that hides you, or the mask that hides me. Ironically, that day we had just started selling masks here at the church, and so we brought the mask out, and I was in charge of pushing those masks and showing you guys, hey, we need to sell these masks. We've got them for you. They got our logo on them, all this stuff. And on that day when I was supposed to push that out, I also preached that message about hiding behind the mask. And then the challenge that I gave was the mask may hide you, but it doesn't help you, which did not help our sales. And we got a lot of amens. We got a lot of amens, but not very many sales. But listen, the point behind that message was for you and I to take off the emotional mask that hides, the thing that tells everyone we're okay when we're not okay. See, we act as if pretending everything is okay will make everything okay. Look, if the enemy can keep you here in this place of denial and hiding, he can keep you from getting help. He can isolate you. He can keep you on your own. It's a common cowardly tactic of war. Your enemy is no different. And you got to see through it. After tearing his clothes, his emotions took another wild turn. These people, they see him. They see what's going on behind the scenes. And in verse 31, it says, "Then he said, God do so and more also to me if the head of Elisha, the son of Shaphat, shall stand on him this day." In other words, I am going to kill Elisha. And we see another thing that the enemy likes to do. He wants to convince you to hate the people God has sent to help you. He wants you to hate people that God has put in your life to help you. Teenagers, we deal with this with teenagers all the time. People, teens that are struggling with teachers because they're too hard on them, or parents because they got stupid rules. But as adults, we go through the same thing. People in our lives, our spouses, people in our lives that God has placed. And what do? We misdirect our anger. We're angry at a situation and we take it out on them. Jehoram was angry. He was angry at the prophet now for some reason. His anger his focus had turned to him. The only thing I can imagine is that maybe because he had the Syrian army, he had some of these soldiers in his kingdom at one point, and he wanted to kill them, and Elisha said, no, feed them and send them on their way. Now he's looking, he's saying, look now, see what happened? I should have killed him back then. And Elisha, you told me not to, so now it's on you. We're going through this because of you. As if Elisha had called the army, as if killing those soldiers would have kept the Syrian army from invading. He was thinking very rash. Be honest, have you fallen for this trick of the enemy? Have you been guilty of attacking or blocking out the people God has sent to help you? We've got to identify what the enemy is doing. So he goes to see where Elisha is and goes to find him, but it sends a messenger, someone with some prestige. He calls him a lord. He sends this lord ahead of him to go and prepare Elisha because the king is on his way. And as he heads there, we see in verse number 33, the messenger speaking on behalf of the king says, it tells us, and while he yet talked to them, behold, the messenger came down unto him, and he said, behold, this evil is of the Lord. What should I wait for the Lord any longer? See, the next thing that we see that our enemy tries to do with us is he wants to convince us to handle problems, for you to handle your problems yourself rather than wait on God. What should I wait any longer for the Lord? He didn't ask, what should I do to find forgiveness? He didn't ask, what should I do to get healing for our land? He didn't ask, what did I do to anger God? It was like asking, for what reason should I wait on the Lord anymore? It was a question of contempt and impatience. Many commentators say that this could have been a sign that he was ready to step out and surrender. You see, Jehoram was ready to take things into his own hand. Why am I waiting anymore for God? God ain't doing anything. And so often the enemy tries to get us to that place. Where is your God now? Why are you going through this? If God is there for you, why are you dealing with this? You know what you need to do? You need to do this, this, and this. He wants to get you to take things into your own hands. Take it into your own hands and choose to fight your own battles instead of waiting on the Lord. Others say that maybe he was planning to call on some surrounding nations to come and help them. But it's a common trap that we fall for regardless. See, the Lord's timing is certainly uncomfortable. It is for sure uncomfortable. For us, it feels like he's either barely on time, just in the nick of time, or completely out of time when he finally decides to show up. The thing is, God is never any of those things because he is outside of time. He's outside looking in. And he knows when to step into the situation to get the outcome that he's looking for. Hear what I just said. He knows when to step in so that he gets the outcome he's looking for. And it may not be the one you're looking for. While you might be looking for a change in your circumstance, he might be looking to bring about a change in your heart. While you might be looking for a way out of your pain, he may be looking to give you a way into the pain of the people around you. While you might be looking for a miracle from the hand of God, he might be looking to give you a message from his own heart. He might be trying to tell you something. Don't be impatient with God. Don't fall for this trick. Another way of the enemy, what he wants to convince you to do, is to hold negative influences above God's promises. See, the story continues into chapter 2. And this Lord that had gone ahead of him, this Lord speaks up. And he questions the promise because Elisha finally tells him, listen, by this day tomorrow, this is going to cost all these things. Basically, he was saying, these things are about to be flipped over. Your deliverance is right here. Tomorrow, this time tomorrow, these things are going to change. But this Lord, someone of power and prestige, had the audacity to question the promise of deliverance. And the point here is not simply the questioning of God. The point that I want to show you is that this person speaking is somebody who had the king's ear. It was a confidant of the king. It was somebody the king held close to him. This person who was so bold to speak to the prophet like this and to question God was somebody the king had close to him, living with him, speaking into his life. In today's age, we have access to a lot of negativity, don't we? There's that coworker who can't stop bad-mouthing the boss, that family member who won't stop talking about every horrible thing that's going on in the world. There's the social media that constantly feeds you the worst news at the worst time. There's all those news reports that pop up on your phone, the things that come across your phone all the time. And we have access to all these things. And we can't seem to break away from them. And what's so funny is so many of these things are customizable. We're able to go in and customize and make it how we want it and all this stuff. And what I thought about is this. You know, we may customize them, but they control us. That's not just a catchy little way of saying. That's true. We might customize them, but they control us. We got to be careful. I finally figured out on my phone, I turned off, I've told y'all this before because I like to rant about it, but I finally turned off the notifications on my phone so that all these news reports would stop telling me how horrible the world is. I finally turned it off. But the problem was I still knew how to get to them. And for whatever reason, I could not help but just swipe my phone so that I could see those news reports. I knew if I just stayed away from that page, I wouldn't see any of it. I'd be happy. But I couldn't help but swipe over to it. And I'd find myself wasting time all day reading about the most horrible things and getting my anxiety worked up and getting my joy out of my life and all those things. And I kept finding my way to it. And then finally I saw this thing at the top of the screen. And maybe it'll change some of your lives. It changed mine. It said edit. So wait a minute. I've seen that word before. I clicked on it and then I saw a minus sign next to that thing that said news. I wonder what this will do. And it was gone. Gone. And listen, understand, I got rid of it. I got it off my phone. But it's not living in ignorance. I know what you're thinking. It's not living in ignorance. It's living with boundaries. It's taking back the ground the devil has taken from me. Living with boundaries. I know where to go to find out those reports. But now I'm in control of finding them. Listen, we need to set up some boundaries for these negative influences in our lives. And let me tell you another thing, because I had developed such a habit of flipping over to this thing all day. Don't tell Pastor. All day. I was flipping over to it, and I'd find a report I'd read. All day, I built such a habit of flipping over to it. You wouldn't believe it. I'm just constantly looking. And what I did, because the devil built this habit in me and tricked me and got me so worked up, what I finally did was I went and I put a podcast where the news report used to be, a podcast, a Christian podcast. So now every time the devil, the habit that the devil built that made me swipe, now that habit the devil built is making me go to God. I'm finding, listen, I'm building boundaries. I'm taking back control of the negativity. I'm getting rid of it. I'm trying to replace it. We might need to have some conversation with friends. Hey, listen, I don't want you to talk about that anymore. You might need to have some conversations or block some people on social media. You may need to limit your access on your phone. Whatever the case, build in boundaries that point you back to the Lord and His promises. Why? Because while all of this was happening, God was at work. See, this king was there ready to fight, but God was at work. He was ready to give up on God, but God was already at work. See, what the king didn't realize, over in chapter 7, verse 6, it tells us that, verse 5 tells us that the Syrians ran, that they left, they abandoned their camp, and we see why in verse 6, that they thought there was a loud noise going on, and they thought Israel had hired these two other great nations to come fight them, and it scared them so bad that they left everything they had, and they fled during the night to get out of there. Guys, they ran and they left everything. Elisha's over here going, why am I waiting on God? I'm mad at God. This is what God's done. This is blah, 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 blah. And these lepers who were finally out of hope and said, let's just go to the Syrians and see if they'll give us mercy. They left, they went to the Syrian camp, and they realized they're gone. And so they run back to the kingdom, and they go and they tell the king. But here's what the king does. This is crazy. The king doesn't believe him. He doesn't believe him. Matter of fact, this next point, go ahead and pull that up for us, Josh. The way of the enemy is to convince you to hang yourself with despair, losing sight of God's providence. I want you to see that because in the midst of their deliverance, Jehoram almost missed it. They were starving despite God's provisions. Jake, what are you talking about? There was a famine in the land. There was an army surrounding them. They thought the army was there to kill them, but the army was actually there to feed them. They thought the army was there to kill them, and maybe their intentions was to kill them. But God turned this thing around. The people that Israel had once fed was now in the midst of this famine, bringing them food. Because God brought that army there, brought their provisions with them, brought their food and everything Israel needed, brought it right there to their kingdom. And then God chased them away, scared them so bad they left every one of them. And the people walk out, and they're able to find the food that God was promising. But here's the thing. With all of his despair and his lack of faith and his pain, Jehoram refused to see it, and he refused to believe it. In verse 12, when they came and they told him about it, they explained to him that the Syrians had left. This is what he said. The king arose in the night and said unto his servants, I will now show you what the Syrians have done. They know that we will be hungry, and therefore they have gone out of the camp to hide themselves in the field, saying that when we come out of this city, that they will catch us alive and get into our city. Caught up in his despair, in all of his fears. I said last week that your fear has a direct line to your focus. Well, he was focused on the circumstances, wasn't he? Listen, here's what you need to see out of this. I don't want you to miss God's providence because you're burying yourself in despair. Burying yourself in despair, and you miss out on what God's doing. He was so hung up on his despair that he couldn't even receive the provisions that God had placed out there. Let me ask you, have you been living in despair? That thing that's happening in your life, you realize that just might be God's way of providing for you. Man, I just lost my job. Maybe God's got a better job for you. Man, this is going on in my life. Well, maybe God's trying to do something better for you. I started off today with a description of your enemy. And I want to close by circling back to that, but giving you good news this time. See, he is vicious, but he is not victorious. He is powerful, but he is not all powerful. He is deceptive, but not unknowable. He is influential, but not in control. He is organized, but not omniscient. He is strategic, but not unstoppable. We are called, yes, we should live with eyes wide open to the work that God is doing, but we should live with eyes wide open to the ways of our enemy, to the tactics that he has out there. And it's not good enough. I'll just say it. It's not good enough to know his moves. You have to know how to respond in those things. You have no hope. Well, that's just him trying to discourage you. You need to remind yourself of God's presence. He says you need to hide your pain. That's just him trying to isolate you. You need to flock to your brothers and sisters. He gets you to misdirect your anger. That's just him trying to blind you. Receive help from God's people. He tries to get you to take things in your own hands. That's him trying to rattle you. Wait on God. He surrounds you with negativity. That's him trying to overwhelm you. Set boundaries. Can't get past your despair. That's him trying to distract you. Remember God's providence. When he comes looking for a fight, Told the teens this morning. If he comes looking for a fight, that's fine. But let's fight with eyes wide open. I'm done fighting with blindfolds on. I'm done giving the devil the upper hand. I'm done saying, all right, devil, I'll take you on with one hand. No. I'm done saying, devil, if the devil's going to come at me, I'm going to take the blindfolds off because I want to see what's happening. And I pray that you will live with eyes wide open to the ways of the enemy.